Tonight, we'll journey together through the bridge that appeared only when stepped upon, a quiet story of trust, presence, and the paths that reveal themselves not through planning, but through walking. Beneath a sky brushed with fading sunlight and the hush of early evening, you begin to drift into the folds of a story woven with mist, gentle symbols, and the soft echo of footsteps on unknown ground. You are safe here, you are welcome here. Before you settle into a comfortable position, take a breath and, if it feels right for you, consider supporting this channel with a like and subscription. We'd love to hear where you're listening from in the comments below. Now, let your body become heavy against whatever is supporting you. Take one deep breath with me now. And as you exhale, know that you've just taken the first step on a journey that has been waiting for you since the beginning of time. Mist clung to the valley like memory low, curling, quietly stubborn. It wrapped the trees in silver threads and softened the edges of the stones beneath each step. A traveler stood at the edge of the forest, breathing in the damp hush of morning. There was no trail ahead, not exactly. Only the faintest suggestion of movement, grass parted, leaves turned, a whisper of something having passed this way before. He wore a simple robe, no shoes. On his back was a cloth bundle, tied neatly, neither heavy nor light. Around his neck hung a carved wooden pendant in the shape of a circle, smooth, unbroken. He did not know where he was going, only that he was going. This was not a journey begun in response to disaster. No exile, no chase. It had started with a quiet longing, the kind that hums beneath the surface of daily life, the yearning not for escape, but for something deeper, something true. Some traditions speak of this as the call without words, a moment when the heart feels pulled not by logic, but by stillness. When questions arise not to be answered, but to be honored. And so, without fanfare, he had left the place of his birth. He had walked through fields and across rivers. He had slept beneath trees and beside old temples. And now, he stood here, at the edge of a valley blanketed in mist, drawn forward by nothing more than breath. The first step was not brave. It was simply offered. He placed his foot down into the dew-wet grass. Then the other, a rhythm began, not rushed, not hesitant. A gentle conversation between foot and earth. Birdsong rose from somewhere unseen. Not the urgent cries of morning, but slow, lilting calls. The kind that seemed to say, "You are not early, you are not late, you are simply here." He passed beneath a crooked pine, its needles glistening like 1,000 tiny lanterns. Beneath it, a flat stone bore a small engraving, a circle with no beginning, no end. He paused and traced it with his finger. And then he smiled. No destination, no path. And yet, somehow, always arriving, he moved on. After some time, the mist thickened. Shapes became less clear. A boulder became a tree. A tree became a shadow. The way forward was no longer seen, only felt. And here something in him stirred not fear, but the flicker of uncertainty. What if I am lost? The thought came like a breeze, light but noticeable. He stopped, he closed his eyes, and he breathed. A teaching from his childhood surfaced, unbidden. To be lost is only to forget the step beneath you. He opened his eyes, looked down, placed one foot forward. The ground held, so he continued. Some Zen teachings describe this moment as the mist of mind, a place where clarity dissolves and the usual guideposts vanish. But this is not confusion. It is invitation. To move not by sight but by trust. To listen not for direction but for alignment. He soon found himself beside a stream, clear, slow, the kind that seems to have no source or destination, only presence. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank. The water was cold and clean, tasting of stone and sky. He sat beside the stream and waited not for a sign, but for the silence to return. It did, and with it, a stillness inside him. A gentle reminder, not all journeys begin with a map. Some begin with surrender. The mist lifted slightly. And with it, a new path shimmered into view, not because it had been revealed, but because he had become still enough to see it. You may find yourself now in a similar valley. Perhaps the path beneath you is unclear. Perhaps you've been waiting for the mist to part before taking a step. But what if the step is what parts the mist? What if the way forward is not shown, but created one breath, one question, one quiet act of courage at a time. Let this be that first step. Let your breath be the ground. Let your presence be the path. What if the bridge between where you are and where you meant to be only appears when you begin to walk? The mist shifted like breath exhaled, parting just enough to reveal the outline of rooftops ahead, wooden and weathered, nestled in a gentle dip in the valley. The traveler's footsteps slowed. He could hear the faint murmur of water running through stone channels, the distant clang of a bell, and carried on the wind, the soft rhythm of a broom sweeping earth. The village was small, but not forgotten. Each home looked as though it had grown from the land itself, walls of cedar softened by moss, shutters barely holding onto their hinges, and gardens wild with herbs that hummed beneath the sun. As the traveler stepped into the main path, heads turned not in suspicion, but with the quiet curiosity reserved for rare visitors. A child peeked from behind a barrel of rainwater. An elder sitting on a low stool nodded once and returned to shelling beans. A dog raised its head, then dropped it again, content. The traveler paused, he bowed, and the village bowed back, not with movement but with presence. He wandered slowly past the open windows, catching glimpses of daily life, steam rising from a cooking pot, hands threading a broken fishing net, laughter wrapped in hush. Everything moved slowly. Nothing seemed to hurry, and yet nothing was idle. In the center of the village, beneath a tall maple whose leaves fluttered like silent prayers, stood a weathered signpost. No words. Only a carved arrow pointing in 3 directions. One led to the forest, one to the river, one to the mountains. The traveler stood before it, uncertain. "Which way?" he murmured. A woman nearby, kneeling as she pressed herbs into bundles, looked up and said, "There is no right way here, only the way you walk." He blinked. "How do people find their path?" She smiled, her hands still moving. "We don't. It finds us when we stop needing to name it." This is the Zen teaching of letting go of certainty, the invitation to loosen our grip on needing to know, and to dwell instead in not knowing. In Buddhism, this is known as beginner's mind, a state of openness, curiosity, and humility that trusts what arises. Some traditions believe that true wisdom doesn't come from answers, but from the patience to remain with the question. The traveler walked a little further and came to a wooden bench where a man carved small figurines from pale wood. The figures were simple monks, birds, stones, clouds, none more detailed than needed. Each one shaped with a single curved knife and hands that did not shake. He looked up. "Lost, are you?" the traveler considered. "Not lost, but not found either," the carver chuckled. "Then you're exactly where you need to be." He held up a carving of a bridge, not yet finished, with one end disappearing into a swirl of uncut wood. "This is how we all cross," he said. "We step, and only then does the next board appear." "But what if it doesn't?" The carver shrugged. "Then perhaps you fly, or fall, or find another way." The traveler sat for a while beside him, watching the curls of wood fall onto the ground, like petals releasing themselves to gravity. And in the silence he noticed something. His body had relaxed. His shoulders had dropped. His breath had deepened. He no longer needed to decide. He only needed to be. You may find yourself now in a similar place, not a village of wood and wind, but a moment in your life where the signs no longer speak clearly, where every direction feels possible or none feel quite right. What if you didn't need to choose with certainty? What if every path becomes the right path once you walk it with presence? Some masters say that the path is not a place, it is how you carry your next step. It is the quiet trust that wherever you go, there you are, and that is enough. The traveler rose and thanked the carver, who simply nodded and turned back to his work. Before leaving, the traveler looked back once more at the villagers, some still sweeping, some resting, some simply looking at the sky. Not one seemed to be searching, and not one seemed to be still. They moved with the rhythm of those who had long stopped trying to get somewhere. They were already there. And so, the traveler chose a direction not because it was better, but because it was now, and he began to walk. The bridge, after all, would only appear when stepped upon. What if the moment you stop demanding certainty is the moment the path begins to speak to you, not in words, but in wind, in soil, in the soft unfolding of each breath? The path the traveler had chosen was narrow, little more than a thread of trodden grass winding between low hills and gentle, leaning trees. It sloped upward at first, then curved down into a quiet hollow where the light filtered through the canopy like soft gold poured from above. Birdsong fluttered here and there, not loud, but patient, as if each note waited for the next to settle before arriving. The village was long behind him now, though its rhythm still echoed in his steps. He no longer walked with the tension of decision. There was only the quiet sound of feet on earth, of breath rising and falling, of the world opening before him, not with certainty, but with calm invitation. And then the path ended, abruptly, no warning. It simply dissolved beneath a cluster of mossy stones at the edge of a dense grove. Before him, tall grasses swayed in the wind, and beyond that, a steep incline. No sign of footprints, no signs at all. The traveler stood still. A familiar stirring rose within him, the question, had he chosen wrong? He turned to look behind. The path was still visible, fading into the trees, almost inviting him to return. To reconsider, to pick a different direction, but instead he stayed. He listened, and the breeze answered. It moved the grasses ahead in a wide arc, opening a brief clearing like the parting of curtains. He stepped forward. There was no trail, just trust. This is the Zen teaching of being present at the edge of unknowing, the willingness to stand where the road vanishes and let stillness take the lead. In Buddhist thought, this place is not a failure of clarity. It is a sacred threshold. A moment when ego cannot plan and only awareness can proceed. Some traditions teach that the moment the road ends is the moment the journey begins. The traveler walked slowly now. Not cautiously, but mindfully. Each footfall became a question, and each answer came only as he stepped. The earth beneath him gave way to rock, then to soft dirt again. A low-hanging branch brushed his shoulder. He ducked beneath it. He crossed a narrow stream with stepping stones slick from years of weather, and then he stopped. Before him was a circle of stones arranged purposefully. In the center, nothing. He walked into the ring and sat down. No sign, no inscription. Only the faint sensation of pause. He took off his bundle, loosened his robe slightly, and listened to his body, to his breath, to the subtle trembling of the present moment. Time passed, not marked by clocks, but by shadow. The sun moved, the air shifted, insects sang. And within all of this, he felt something begin to settle deep within him. The need to know had dissolved. And with it, a strange kind of peace. He recalled a story once shared in the courtyard of a temple told by a traveling nun who had walked barefoot for 3 years without once asking for direction. A man stood at the edge of a cliff, afraid to fall. A voice behind him said, "Step forward," he said. "There is nothing there," the voice said. "Exactly," he stepped, and the bridge appeared beneath his feet. Only then did he understand. The bridge was not waiting, it was responding. The traveler remembered how the nun had smiled at the end of the story, not to explain it, but to leave it whole. And now, sitting within the circle of stones, he felt something similar rise in his chest, not joy exactly, not relief, but an openness, as though his heart had become a window. You may know this feeling too. That moment when life offers you no clear next step. When the trail ends, when the decision cannot be made from reason alone. And perhaps, like the traveler, you've stood at the edge, waiting for signs. But what if the sign is silence? What if the step creates the way? Some teachings suggest that the universe meets us at the moment of our willingness, not before. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move with it. The wind circled through the stones, stirring the leaves in soft spirals. The traveler stood, wrapped his bundle once more, and bowed to the empty center. Then, without thinking, he turned not back, not sideways, but forward. Into the grasses, into the unknown. Into the story that had not yet been written. And with his first step, something shifted. The earth did not move, but his heart did. The bridge, he sensed, was waiting not ahead, not behind, but within. What if the path appears not when you find the right direction, but when you become quiet enough to step into the space that scares you and trust it to hold you? A hush settled over the traveler as he stepped beyond the circle of stones. It wasn't the silence of absence, but the quiet of presence, a stillness so complete it seemed to listen with him. The grasses gave way to smooth earth. The air was denser here, rich with the scent of pine needles, rain-soaked wood, and something older, something like memory. Ahead, nestled against a crooked bend in the hillside, was a small hut, simple, round, with no walls and no door. Only a thatched roof supported by 4 wooden posts and a single stone platform inside, worn smooth by time. Smoke curled gently from a clay vessel near the center. Someone was there. An old woman, sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, hands resting lightly on her knees. She was so still she might have been carved from the mountain itself. Her hair, long and silver, moved only slightly in the breeze. The traveler stopped at the edge of the clearing. He bowed. She opened her eyes, not wide, not startled, just enough to meet his presence. "You've walked a long way," she said, as if commenting on the weather. "I don't know how far I've come," the traveler replied. "Then perhaps you've come far enough." She gestured to a flat stone beside her. He sat. She poured water from a kettle suspended over the embers into 2 cups, carved from hollowed gourd. The steam rose, carrying a fragrance he couldn't quite place, earthy, floral, with a hint of smoke. They drank without words. This is the Zen teaching of unlearning, the art of releasing what we think we know in order to see clearly again. In Buddhist practice, there is a saying, empty your cup. Not just of knowledge, but of the expectation that knowledge is what you need. Some traditions believe that wisdom does not accumulate, it is revealed when the noise is removed. The old woman looked at him carefully. "You're searching," she said. "I think so," he admitted. "For what?" He opened his mouth, then paused. The answer felt slippery. "I don't know anymore," she nodded, satisfied. "Good." She then told a story, her voice like soft rain tapping on stone. A student came to a master and asked for enlightenment. The master offered tea. As he poured, the cup overflowed. The student said, "It is spilling." The master said, "So is your mind? Empty it, or nothing more can enter." The traveler set his cup down and let the silence return. He realized he had arrived expecting something. A teaching, a sign, an answer. But instead, he was being invited to let go of questions themselves. "Why is your hut open?" he asked softly. "No walls, no doors," she said. "So that whatever wants to come, may come, and whatever needs to leave, can leave?" "Isn't that unsafe?" She smiled gently. "Safe for whom?" Some teachings remind us that much of what we build, our certainty, our expectations, even our sense of self, is a wall, a way to keep life manageable. But Zen suggests that true freedom lies beyond walls. In the open structure, in the sky that never demands limits. The traveler looked around. There was no scroll, no altar, no symbols, just space, fire, water, and presence. And in that, there was a kind of teaching more whole than any words could offer. You may feel now the echo of this hut within yourself, the structure of your mind, the thoughts that knock, the emotions that enter and exit. Perhaps, like the old woman, you might consider opening the door or removing the walls altogether. Some traditions teach that when we stop controlling what arrives, we begin to receive what we never knew we needed. The traveler stood slowly. "Thank you," he said. "For the tea?" she asked. "For the stillness." She nodded. "Stillness doesn't belong to me, it belongs to you. You just remembered it here." He bowed again. As he stepped back toward the path, she called after him. "The bridge you're looking for may not lead anywhere." He paused, turned. "Then why walk it?" She smiled. "To realize you already carry what you thought you were seeking." The smoke from her kettle rose into the air like a question released. The traveler walked on. The forest embraced him again, and something within him tightly held for so long began to loosen. What if the answers you seek are not something to find, but something to forget, so that the quiet within you can rise and speak its own gentle truth? The forest deepened as the traveler moved forward, though the path remained invisible. It was not a trail marked by feet, but by feeling an inward sense of direction that had little to do with logic or geography. Here, among tall trunks and the hush of moss underfoot, the air grew cooler. The light filtered through in golden strands, dancing between branches as if guiding him not with arrows, but with attention. His pace slowed naturally, every step invited a breath. Every breath invited listening. the kind of listening that doesn't wait to respond but simply opens. And then, without sound or warning, his chest tightened, not from pain, but from weight. Something was stirring, not outside but within. He became aware of the bundle on his back. Not the one tied with cloth, but the other, the invisible one, woven from memory, from expectation, from the heavy whispers we carry without realizing. He stopped, the silence around him thickened, and he knew it was time. He sat at the base of a large tree, roots like open arms cradling the ground beneath him. He removed his satchel and set it aside, but still the weight remained, so he turned inward and began to look at what he was truly carrying. This is the Zen teaching of unseen burdens, the emotional weight we accumulate through years of striving, comparison, and quiet fear. In Buddhist thought, these are the attachments we mistake for necessities, the roles we defend, the expectations we nurture, the fears we fold into our identity. Some traditions describe this as the second load, not the hardship itself, but the suffering layered atop it, created by our resistance. The traveler closed his eyes. He saw images, the need to prove himself, the pressure to be useful. The echoes of voices from long ago: be strong, be certain, don't stop. He breathed through them. He didn't argue. He just named them, and with each naming, something softened. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from his boyhood. A monk once visited his village and offered a teaching to the children. Imagine you are carrying a basket, the monk said. Every time you worry, complain, or try to be someone else, you place a stone inside. One child asked, "What happens when it's full?" The monk smiled. "You forget it's a basket." "You think it's your spine?" another asked. "How do we empty it?" The monk replied, "By remembering to set it down." The traveler opened his eyes, and gently, without rush, he placed his hands in his lap and imagined untying the invisible cords. He didn't throw anything away. He just allowed it to rest beside him like the satchel on the ground. The forest did not change, but he did. His breath deepened, his spine softened, his jaw unclenched. A bird landed nearby and chirped once, as if acknowledging the shift. You may notice something similar in yourself now. Some tension you've outgrown, so used to carrying that it feels like part of who you are. Some bundle of worry, of self-doubt, of unspoken pressure that whispers, don't stop, don't rest, keep proving. But what if you could set it down? Not forever, just for now. Let your breath be the act of untying. Let each exhale be a stone removed. Let the ground hold what you no longer need to grip. Some teachings say that the moment we stop resisting the weight is the moment we remember we were never meant to carry it all. The traveler stood. He did not feel light, but he no longer felt heavy. There was a difference. He bowed to the tree, its roots now part of the memory of release. And as he walked on, his steps felt quieter. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. What if the heaviness you feel is not the world, but the unseen weight of what you've agreed to carry? And what if peace begins the moment you are willing to set it down? The path ahead wove gently downward, threading through moss-covered stones and leaning trees that arched above like old monks in eternal bow. The traveler's breath moved freely now, his steps unhurried. Something within him had shifted, not in dramatic revelation, but like ice thawing beneath sunlight, quiet, steady, and complete only in its own time. As he moved further into the valley, the forest opened into a small glade. There, a clearing bathed in filtered light welcomed him. And at its center, seated beside a shallow stream, was a figure wrapped in ochre robes. The man was still, yet alert. His head tilted slightly as if listening not to the world, but to the space between sounds. A pile of river stones sat beside him, each one smoothed by time, stacked with deliberate care into balanced towers that leaned impossibly, yet did not fall. The traveler bowed in greeting. The man returned the gesture with a small nod and gestured to the opposite bank of the stream, where a cushion of moss waited, sun-warmed and silent. The traveler sat. For a time they said nothing. Only the stream spoke, murmuring over stones like wind speaking in its sleep. Eventually the man spoke. "You've come far." "Yet I feel I've just begun," the traveler replied. The man nodded. Many confused distance with depth. This is the Zen teaching of being instead of becoming. the idea that we do not need to arrive somewhere different in order to be whole. In Buddhist philosophy, the path is not a line from here to there, it is a circle, a spiral, a still point walked many ways. Some traditions believe that presence is not found in progress, but in the full acceptance of this very breath. The man reached for one of the stones and held it up. "Do you see this?" The traveler nodded. "It spent years in water," the man said. "Not fighting the current, not holding on to its sharpness. It allowed itself to be shaped. Now, it fits into the hand like it belongs." He placed the stone down gently and told a story soft and patient. There once was a boy who wanted to become wise. He asked the teacher, "How do I become like you?" The teacher said, "Go to the stream each day, sit, listen," the boy protested. "But when will I learn?" The teacher only smiled. When you stop becoming and start being, years passed. One day, the boy now grown returned. The teacher asked, "What have you learned?" He replied, "I stopped waiting to become someone. I started showing up as myself." The traveler let the story settle into him like water into thirsty ground. He looked at the stacked stones. "Do you ever worry they'll fall?" The man shook his head slowly. "Of course they'll fall, but not while I'm here." He lifted one stone from a stack and replaced it in a new spot. The tower wobbled but held. "And if they do?" the traveler asked. "Then I begin again, with less effort and more listening." The stream gurgled in agreement, its rhythm uninterrupted. You might reflect now on your own towers, your goals, your identities, the structures you've carefully stacked to hold your sense of self. Perhaps they are leaning. Perhaps you fear they may fall. But what if falling is not failure? What if rebuilding is simply remembering the wisdom you now carry? Some teachings remind us that we are not meant to be rigid monuments, but living rivers, always shifting, always reshaping. Peace comes not from perfection, but from presence. The man motioned to the water. "Would you like to try?" The traveler stepped into the stream, removed his sandals, and knelt. The stones were slick, cool, responsive. He chose 3. Not for size or shape, but for how they felt in his hand. He placed the first on the soft bank, then the second. The third took longer. It wobbled. He breathed. He adjusted. It settled. The tower was small, but it stood. And in its simplicity, it carried something sacred. You may imagine now your own small tower. Not of ambition, but of presence. Not built to last forever, but to teach you how to place each moment gently. One breath, one word, one kind act at a time. The traveler stepped back and looked at his creation. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't high, but it was enough. He bowed to the man, who nodded once and returned to his own quiet balance. The traveler continued on, leaving the glade without turning back. The stream would remember. The stones would rest. And he too carried a new stillness, now not something learned, but something remembered. What if being whole is not something you become, but something you uncover, one quiet breath at a time, by laying down your sharpness and letting the stream of life shape you into ease? The traveler walked on, bare feet brushing against the softened earth of the path, his sandals slung over his shoulder. The stream's voice faded behind him, but its rhythm stayed in his steps, a quiet echo of balance, of listening, of stone resting against stone. As he followed a narrow bend through a thicket of cedar and fig, the air shifted again, cooler, laced with the scent of distant rain and old roots. He heard no sound but his breath. Even the birds had stilled, as if the forest had entered a shared pause. Then he saw it. Not far ahead, curled in the shade of a wide-bodied tree, was a fox. Its fur was the color of ash and cinnamon, and its eyes, half closed, unafraid, met his gaze without blinking. The traveler froze, not in fear, but in reverence. The fox did not stir. It only watched. He bowed his head slightly and waited. The fox tilted its head, then stood and walked slowly, casually down a side trail the traveler hadn't noticed before. As it moved, it looked back once, as if to say, "If you trust, follow." So he did. They walked in silence. The forest grew thicker, the shadows deeper. The ground rose and fell in soft waves. The fox remained a few steps ahead, never rushing, never stopping. Then suddenly it vanished, slipping between 2 slender trees and into a hollow so narrow the traveler had to turn sideways to enter. On the other side, everything was still. No path, no fox. Just a circle of stones around an old Bodhi tree whose roots reached both downward and outward, weaving through rock and earth like veins of time. The traveler stepped into the circle and sat. This is the Zen teaching of the illusion of control, the recognition that much of our tension arises not from what happens, but from our insistence that we must shape it, fix it, or prevent it. In Buddhist tradition, this is the root of suffering, clinging to the belief that we are in charge of a world that moves like wind, water, and foxes, unpredictable and wise in their own ways. Some traditions say that animals carry teachings not in words but in presence, that a fox can be a messenger, not of secrets but of surrender. The traveler thought of how he had followed without knowing where, how he had trusted movement without a promise of destination. And he remembered a story, told once in a temple garden beneath the shade of a swaying banner. A disciple asked the master, "How do I stay on the path when it disappears?" The master replied, "Then the fox becomes your teacher." "But the fox doesn't speak." "No," said the master, "it walks. You must learn to follow without needing to lead." "And if I get lost?" The master smiled. "Then you will finally see where you are." The wind moved through the Bodhi leaves with a sound like whispering silk. The traveler leaned back against the tree and felt its bark press against his spine like a second breath. His thoughts drifted, then returned, drifted again, and returned. He watched his mind as one watches clouds. No grasping, no pushing, just allowing. He thought again of the fox, of how it had appeared, how it had vanished. How it had led him here, not with commands, but with its own silent presence. You may find echoes of this in your own life. The moments when something, an instinct, a dream, a wordless nudge called you in a direction you didn't understand. Perhaps you followed. Perhaps you didn't. But what if guidance does not always come as instruction? What if it comes as invitation? Some teachings remind us that the most important paths are not the ones we choose, but the ones we allow to choose us. That we are not here to control the forest, but to move with it, watchfully, gently, step by mindful step. The traveler stood and bowed to the tree, then turned back. As he emerged from the hollow, he noticed something small, something subtle. His breath was no longer caught in his chest. His shoulders hung lower, his steps landed more softly. He no longer walked through the forest, he walked with it. The fox, unseen, had taught what no words could say, that surrender is not defeat. It is participation in a world wiser than our plans. What if the quietest teachers in your life, those you cannot name, explain, or predict, are guiding you not with certainty, but with presence, asking only that you follow with an open heart? The light shifted as the traveler continued, no longer golden, but blue-gray, the kind of light that precedes rain or reflection. The trees thinned, and a wide meadow opened before him, dotted with low stones and small pools of water where reeds grew in tight clusters. He walked more slowly now, not because he was tired, but because the world around him seemed to ask for stillness, for reverence. There, near the edge of a quiet pond, stood an unlit lantern on a tall wooden post. No wick, no oil. Just the frame, weathered and worn, yet somehow untouched by decay. Beneath it, a small mat had been placed, woven from river grass, frayed at the corners. The traveler stepped toward it and paused. The lantern, unlit and hollow, felt familiar not as an object, but as a feeling. A space once bright, now empty, and yet it remained standing. He sat on the mat and waited. The wind stirred the surface of the pond. Ripples formed and drifted outward, dissolving before reaching the far edge. Leaves fell silently from the trees, landing on the water without resistance. The traveler closed his eyes. This is the Zen teaching of inner light revealed in stillness, the understanding that illumination does not always come from outside sources, but rises within us when the noise subsides. In Buddhist tradition, this is the lamp within the heart, the light that does not burn or flicker, but glows steadily once uncovered. Some traditions believe that true clarity comes not when something is added, but when all else is removed. The traveler remembered a parable once shared in a monastery built on the side of a cliff, where clouds rolled through the hallways like slow guests. A student asked his teacher, "Why do I feel so dark inside?" The teacher gave him an unlit lantern. "Carry this with you," he said. The student waited for oil, for flame, for instruction. But none came. Years passed. He walked, worked, wept. One day, in despair, he sat with the lantern in his lap and wept quietly. And as he cried, he noticed a soft glow, faint but growing. It came not from the lantern, but from within himself. The traveler breathed deeply. The lantern before him remained unlit. And yet, in the silence around it, he began to feel something warm within his chest, not emotion, not thought, but awareness. A quiet presence rising like morning fog lifting from a field. He realized then that the lantern was never broken. It simply didn't need flame to shine. It was there as a mirror, and the light was his. You may recognize this sensation, 2 moments when the world around you dims, and you search for something to illuminate your way. Answers, affirmations, direction. But what if, instead of seeking brightness out there, you allowed yourself to grow quiet enough to notice the glow already inside? Some teachings say the soul is not ignited by knowledge or noise, but by stillness. That the most powerful truths arise not in speech, but in silence that echoes back your own depth. The traveler remained seated, his breath slow and steady until even his thoughts became soft footfalls on a quiet path. Eventually he stood. He bowed to the unlit lantern, not with expectation, but with gratitude. Then turned to go. And as he walked away, he noticed though no fire had been struck and no oil poured, the lantern cast a faint shimmer across the water. Not because it burned, but because he now knew how to see it. You may carry this with you now. This quiet reminder that your light is not something to earn, to find, or to protect. It is what you are when all else falls away. Let your next breath be an invitation. Let your exhale be the clearing of smoke. Let the silence around you reveal what no voice ever could. What if the lantern you've been searching for does not need to burn because the light you seek has always been quietly glowing from within you? The meadow gave way to soft hills, rolling gently beneath the dimming sky. The traveler walked with ease now, as though the earth beneath him had remembered his weight and learned how to carry it. His hands hung loosely at his sides. No tension in his shoulders, no urge to hurry. The path ahead wasn't clearer, only quieter. He crested a small ridge and found himself at the edge of a shallow stream, clear, cold, and winding through stones polished smooth by countless seasons. A worn footbridge once crossed here, but now only the mossy posts remained, rising from the water like ancient teeth. No way across, it seemed. The traveler stood at the bank and studied the flow. The water wasn't fast, but it wasn't still. Crossing barefoot might be easy, but also cold, slippery, vulnerable. He hesitated. And then, without further thought, he sat. This is the Zen teaching of meeting the present moment with vulnerability, the willingness to arrive as you are. To feel what you feel without armor or avoidance. In Buddhist tradition, this mirrors the concept of radical presence, allowing the moment to fully unfold without reaching for distraction or protection. Some traditions say that true strength comes not from how well you avoid discomfort, but from how gently you meet it. The traveler removed his sandals, rolled his robe up to his knees, and stepped into the stream. The cold reached him instantly. It wasn't harsh, but it was clear, honest. He placed one foot and the other, testing each step on the slick stones below. The current whispered against his legs. The chill traveled through his skin into his bones, and still he did not resist. Instead he breathed, and walked slowly, carefully, each step an act of attention. Halfway across he paused. Water up to his shins, robe dampened where it touched. He closed his eyes and listened. To the water, to his body, to the small voice that usually stayed just beneath thought but now surfaced gently, saying, "You are safe here, even in your exposure." He remembered a story told by a fisherman beside a foggy bay, one early morning long ago. A man once refused to cross a river. He said it was too cold, too uncertain. "But the other side has what you seek," said his friend. The man said, "Then I will build a raft strong enough to protect me." Years passed. The raft was built. Heavy, perfect, strong. But when he tried to cross, the raft sank under its own weight. His friend waded across barefoot. The man wept, not from cold but from having waited so long to feel it. The traveler opened his eyes, smiled, and continued. The far bank came sooner than expected. He stepped out, water dripping from his robe, legs tingling. He sat on a warm stone and let the sun, low in the sky, dry him slowly. You may recognize something here. Perhaps you've built your own raft's plans, habits, beliefs, meant to keep you from the cold current of uncertainty. Perhaps you've hesitated to step into something that might challenge your comfort. But what if vulnerability is not a flaw? What if it's a passage? Some teachings remind us that we are not made to be invulnerable, we are made to feel, to step barefoot into cold water, to trust our own breath to carry us through. The traveler put on his sandals again, but only after he had fully dried. He didn't rush, he didn't shake the water off. He let the river teach him gently. He let the air receive him fully. And when he stood, he was lighter not because anything had been left behind, but because nothing had been avoided. The sky above was tinged with amber now, the sun beginning to bow toward the horizon, and the traveler walked on, not cleaner, not wiser, but clearer. The stream whispered behind him, and the mossy posts stood still, watching. What if the moments that make you feel most exposed are also the ones that invite you most fully into your own presence? And what if the only bridge you ever needed was the courage to step in with bare feet and an open heart? Evening descended with the gentleness of silk falling over the shoulders of the day. The traveler walked beneath a sky deepening from blue to violet, the first stars appearing like shy thoughts, quiet and certain. His feet brushed dry leaves. Crickets had begun their song. The hush between their chirps held its own kind of music. The path ahead narrowed through a grove of tall, slender trees. Their trunks stood close together, as though in silent council. Each step forward brought a faint resonance of bells sound, distant but unmistakable, carried on the cooling air like a memory remembered not by the mind, but by the bones. The traveler stopped, heart softened by the sound. Again, the bell rang low, slow, each note fading into silence before the next arrived. He followed. Soon, through the trees, he saw its source, a small shrine tucked into a hillside, its stone steps worn and half covered by creeping moss. Atop the highest step sat a bell adorned, with no rope to ring it and no hand to guide its voice. And yet it rang, gently, with the wind. The traveler climbed the steps slowly. Each one seemed to rise not just from the earth, but from time itself. And when he reached the top, he did not touch the bell. He simply sat beside it and listened. This is the Zen teaching of impermanence and echo, the truth that all things arise, resonate and dissolve, not to be clung to, but to be heard. In Buddhist tradition, the bell symbolizes both awakening and fading, a call to mindfulness and a reminder of the transitory nature of all sound, all thought, all life. Some traditions say that the truest sound is not in the bell itself, but in the silence it returns us to. The traveler closed his eyes and let the bell's tone sink into him. He thought of the voices he once tried to hold, the affirmations, the praise, the stories others told about who he was. He had clutched them like anchors, hoping they would define him. But now, like the bell, he realized their purpose was not permanence. It was resonance. He remembered a tale shared by a poet monk beneath a flowering plum tree. A disciple once asked, "Why does truth disappear when I grasp it?" The master struck a bell and let it ring. "Try to hold that note," he said. The disciple cupped the air. "You cannot hold it," the master said, "but you can hear it. You can remember it, and you can let it change you. So I should forget it?" The disciple asked. "No," the master smiled. "You should bow to it and move forward." The traveler opened his eyes. The bell no longer rang. The air was still, and yet he could feel it within him. Not the sound itself, but the hush it left behind. A kind of sacred spaciousness, a reverberation in the soul. You might sense it too. The memory of something you heard once, not with ears, but with being. A moment that passed but changed you. A phrase, a presence, a silence that felt like being seen. What if that moment, like the bell, was not meant to stay? What if it was meant to move through you, so that you could carry its echo into everything that followed? Some teachings remind us, let things touch you, let them go, and let them live on not as weight, but as music. The traveler stood slowly. He did not ring the bell. He did not need to, its sound would return or it would not. But either way, he had heard what he came to hear. As he descended the steps, the first full stars emerged in the darkening sky. He did not look back, he only listened for what came next. And when it came wind, leaf, or silence, he was ready. What if the most important lessons in your life aren't meant to be kept, but to be heard, felt deeply, and carried forward like the fading note of a bell, still ringing in the silence that follows? Night had fully unfolded, but it did not press and it opened. The darkness was not heavy, but spacious, like a sky turned inside out. The stars scattered across the heavens like soft-spoken truths, countless and ungraspable. A breeze moved through the tall grass beside the path, whispering secrets only the still-hearted could hear. The traveler walked without lantern, without hesitation. His eyes adjusted to the dim, his feet trusted the earth. Ahead, nestled beneath a canopy of leaning bamboo, a small tea house came into view, low and square, with open windows and a soft glow emanating from within. The scent of roasted barley and fresh pine drifted toward him on the wind, warm and familiar. He approached slowly. Inside, a tea master knelt beside a kettle suspended above charcoal embers. She wore a simple robe. Her hands, though wrinkled, moved with the grace of falling water, each gesture purposeful, but never hurried. She looked up as the traveler entered, bowed her head slightly, and motioned to a cushion. He returned the bow and sat. No words passed between them, only steam and silence. She set out 3 cups, though they were the only 2 present, then poured tea into the first, the second, and the third. This is the Zen teaching of emptiness and receptivity, the idea that only a vessel unfilled can be filled. That we must first empty ourselves of expectation, ego, and judgment in order to truly receive what life offers. In Buddhist tradition, this is known as Shoshin beginner's mind. The clear, open awareness that meets the moment as if for the first time. Some traditions say the master pours 3 cups not for 3 people, but for 3 states of mind: the thinker, the observer, and the one who simply drinks. The tea master lifted her cup. The traveler did the same. The tea was bitter, earthy, with a note of something sweet that lingered long after swallowing. The master spoke. "Most people drink to remember," she said. "Some drink to forget." She paused, but a few drink only to taste. The traveler set his cup down slowly. "I have spent years trying to become someone," he said softly. She nodded. "And who did you become?" "I'm not sure," he replied. "But I'm beginning to meet the one who was always underneath." She reached for the 3rd cup and lifted it gently. "This cup is for the part of you that doesn't need to know." She offered it to him. He held it in both hands and drank, not for wisdom, not for healing, not even for peace, just to taste, just to receive, and in doing so something melted, not broken, not lost, just loosened. You may feel something like this now, a softening, an unraveling of the need to strive, to figure it out, to get there. What if you are already there? What if what you need most isn't more insight, but more space, more stillness? More sips? Some teachings remind us that the most sacred things come not with meaning but with presence. That to receive fully we must arrive with empty hands, open hearts, and the courage to not know. The tea master refilled all 3 cups. Again, no one spoke. Steam rose between them like a bridge, connecting 2 beings through quiet breath and shared simplicity. The traveler bowed once more, deeper this time. Not to the master, but to the space that had been made. He stood lighter than when he arrived. And as he walked into the night, he carried nothing in his hands, but everything in his heart. The stars seemed to shine brighter now, not because they had changed, but because he had emptied enough to notice. What if wholeness is not something you earn, but something you receive when you set down your questions? Empty your cup, and allow yourself to simply taste this moment. The night deepened, not in darkness, but in depth, like the silence between notes in a familiar melody. The traveler walked with the ease of someone no longer searching, though he did not yet know where he was going. The tea lingered on his breath, subtle and grounding, like a song remembered in silence. The forest opened once more, and rain began to fall, not in torrents, but in soft, deliberate drops. Each one kissed the leaves, the earth, and the traveler's skin like a blessing. He did not seek shelter. He tilted his face upward and let the rain find him. This is the Zen teaching of allowing discomfort without resistance, the practice of receiving each sensation, emotion, or experience without the reflex to avoid or escape it. In Buddhist thought, this is the essence of equanimity, a state of mind undisturbed by pleasure or pain, grounded in acceptance. Some traditions say the rain does not choose where to fall. It simply falls. The wise do not argue with it. They listen. The traveler walked slower now. His robe grew damp, heavy at the sleeves. His hair clung to his face, but his body moved easily, without tension. Ahead, he saw a wooden structure, a roof with no walls, open on all sides with a low bench beneath. An invitation, not a command. He stepped beneath it and sat. From here, he could watch the rain continue its quiet work, feeding the roots, cleansing the leaves, darkening the soil. The air smelled of stone and moss and something older still, something like surrender. He thought of a story told once in a garden just after a summer storm. A monk sat in the rain, unmoving. A passerby called out, "Why not find shelter?" The monk replied, "I am not outside the rain." The passerby said, "You will be soaked." The monk smiled. "I am already soaked with sorrow, with joy, with life itself. Let this rain complete me." The traveler removed his sandals, set them beside the bench, and closed his eyes. The drops fell on the roof above with a sound like 100 heartbeats. He let his breath join them. He let his thoughts pass through like clouds, damp and tender. He remembered the times in his life when rain had come uninvited, loss, change, endings, uncertainty. Times he had rushed to cover himself, to escape the wetness of feeling. And now he understood. The rain was not something to be avoided. It was something to be felt. You might know this rain, too, not the one that falls from clouds, but the one that arrives as grief, discomfort, restlessness. The kind that soaks through your plans, blurs the lines of your identity. What if this rain is not a mistake? What if it is the cleansing? Some teachings remind us that we grow not only through sunlight, but through storms. That the soul, like the soil, needs both to become fertile ground for awakening. The traveler opened his eyes. The rain still fell, but now it felt like music. He stepped out from under the roof and back into its rhythm, barefoot and smiling. His robe clung to him, but his spirit moved freely. He did not hurry. He did not hide. He simply walked. The water pooled beneath each step, then smoothed out behind him like the breath of the earth itself. What if the storms you've resisted are the very waters that soften your edges, deepen your roots, and invite you to live fully even when soaked, even when uncertain, even when undone? The rain eventually quieted, not with a sudden stop, but with a soft retreat like a guest who knows when to leave. Droplets still clung to the branches, hanging heavy and clear. The traveler walked through a world renewed. The path beneath him was darker now, slick and glistening, but his steps were steady, each one deliberate. Mist curled once again across the ground, re-emerging from the earth as if it too had been washed clean. Ahead, a narrow ridge rose between two hills veiled in light fog. The traveler approached and paused at its base. There was no path leading upward, just stone and soil, worn smooth by wind and time. He stepped forward anyway. The climb was not steep, but it demanded attention. Loose pebbles shifted beneath his feet. Roots twisted across the slope. With each step, he had to adjust. His breath deepened, his center dropped lower, his body responded not with force, but with listening. And then, just as he reached the top, the fog parted, and there it was, a bridge, thin as a shadow, delicate as moonlight. Not made of wood or stone, but of something finer. A shimmer in the air, a ripple in reality. The traveler stopped. If he hadn't stepped this far, he might never have seen it. This is the Zen teaching of faith in movement, the understanding that some things appear not when you wait for them, but when you walk toward them. In Buddhist tradition, this echoes the principle of Prajna wisdom that arises from direct experience, from embodied trust rather than analysis. Some traditions say the bridge to awakening does not pre-exist. It is laid stone by invisible stone, with each breath we take into the unknown. The traveler stepped closer. The bridge had no railings, no visible supports. It simply arched across a chasm so veiled in mist that its bottom could not be seen. He placed one foot on its surface. It held. He placed the other. The bridge did not become more solid, but he did. He looked neither back nor down. He walked, and with each step, the bridge extended just enough to meet him, not before, not after, exactly when needed. He remembered a story told once in a monastery so high in the mountains that the stars seemed near enough to touch. A student feared stepping onto the unknown. The teacher took him to a frozen lake. "Walk," the teacher said. The student hesitated. "What if the ice breaks?" The teacher answered, "Then the truth will hold you." The student stepped. The ice cracked, but beneath it solid ground. The teacher smiled. "Sometimes the cracking is the path," the traveler inhaled. The mist curled around him but did not obscure him. He was becoming part of the path, no longer a separate figure, but a thread in the fabric of this unfolding. You may find echoes of this bridge within your own journey. Moments where nothing seems certain, where no step is guaranteed to hold. And yet, you move forward because something within you says, this is the way. Some teachings remind us that the bridge is never built for the hesitant, but for the humble. For those willing to walk not in confidence, but in trust. For those who understand that not knowing is not weakness, it is the gateway to real wisdom. The traveler reached the midpoint of the bridge. He did not look back. He did not ask how much farther. He simply breathed, and stepped again and again, each movement sacred. Each step an offering. The mist behind him closed softly. The path ahead remained hidden, but the bridge, fragile and faithful, continued to appear. What if the next part of your path only becomes visible when you step forward, not because you reassure, but because you're willing to walk into the unknown with presence, breath, and a quiet heart? Midway across the bridge, the traveler slowed, not from fear, but from awe. There was no wind here, no sound of rushing water below, only stillness, suspended like breath held just before release. The mist clung to the sides of the path, parting enough to allow passage, but not enough to reveal what lay on either side. The bridge was narrow, barely the width of 2 feet, and its surface shimmered like the surface of undisturbed water. He paused, then sat, right there on the very spine of the unknown. This is the Zen teaching of the middle way, a principle of neither grasping nor rejecting, of not rushing forward nor turning back. In Buddhist practice, the middle path is both literal and metaphoric. The space between extremes, the place of balance, of quiet wisdom born from stillness and motion. Some traditions say that to stop in the middle is not to hesitate, it is to honor, to listen, to receive. The traveler closed his eyes, and in the quiet of that hovering space, something within him rose, not a thought, not a memory, but a sensation. The recognition that he was not moving through the bridge was moving through him. He breathed deeply, and with that breath came a story, one he hadn't thought of in years. A young monk walked across a narrow bridge on a windy day. His master followed behind. Halfway across, the monk froze, the wind howled. The ground swayed. "Master, I cannot go forward. I cannot go back," he cried. The master sat beside him. "Then stay," he said. This too is walking. They sat for hours. When the wind calmed, they rose. And the monk never feared the middle again. The traveler smiled at the memory. He looked down. There was no visible ground, only mist and space and the sense of something vast holding everything. He looked ahead. The far side remained unseen, but this time he didn't need to see it, because here, right here, was enough. You may know a middle space in your own life, a time between decisions, between identities, between knowing and not knowing. Perhaps you've asked, am I stuck? But what if you are not stuck? What if you are simply suspended, held in place by a wisdom that says, this moment matters too? Some teachings remind us that pause is not the opposite of progress. It is the breath that makes movement meaningful. Without pause, there is no rhythm. Without the middle, there is no crossing. The traveler opened his eyes. The mist shifted gently as if exhaling with him. He stood, not because he had to, but because the stillness had done its work. He took another step. And again the bridge extended, faithful, invisible, quiet. Each step now was easier. Not because the path was certain, but because the pause had reminded him he did not need to rush. The pace of presence had returned. He walked with the ease of someone who had made peace with not knowing. Someone who understood that the middle is not a problem to be solved. It is a place to bow, and so he did. Mid-step, mid-breath, midway across everything he bowed, not in ceremony, but in surrender. What if the space between where you were and where you re-going is not an interruption, but a sacred resting place where presence reveals what rushing never could? The traveler continued across the bridge, the mist thinning now, revealing hints of light soft, golden, neither day nor night, perhaps dawn, perhaps dusk. In this space, time was less a line and more a quiet unfolding, like the petals of a lotus opening without urgency. The bridge beneath him held firm, not because it was solid, but because he no longer questioned its strength. And then, on the far end, he saw a figure, seated cross-legged, facing him. A man, robed in plain linen, still as a mountain in meditation. His face calm, eyes closed, hands resting gently on his knees, the traveler slowed. When he drew near, the man opened his eyes. They did not pierce, they reflected, as though the traveler were seeing himself, not his features, but his mind, mirrored in calm. The man inclined his head slightly and spoke. "I am your mirror." This is the Zen teaching of self-recognition through others, the awareness that each person we meet is a reflection of our own mind. In Buddhist tradition, the world is often described as a mirror, not because it flatters or distorts, but because it shows us what we are ready to see. Some traditions teach, every encounter is a teacher. Every judgment a lesson in disguise. The traveler sat across from the mirror monk. He did not ask questions. He simply waited. And the monk spoke. "You've come far to see what was always with you." "I've followed rivers, climbed ridges, crossed mist," the traveler replied. "I've sought silence, truth, peace." "And what did you find?" The traveler looked down at his hands. "Nothing that wasn't already here," the monk smiled. "You saw more clearly. That is enough." He then shared a story one told only to those who reached the center of the path. A man wandered for years seeking the truth. He visited masters, read sutras, fasted, meditated. One day, exhausted, he sat before a still pond. A breeze disturbed the water. Then it calmed. He saw his reflection. And for the first time, he did not turn away. He whispered, "There you are." The pond whispered back, "I always was." The traveler closed his eyes. And in the darkness behind his lids, he saw not images or dreams, but presence itself untouched, unshaped, like a mirror before it reflects. He opened his eyes again. "I'm not who I thought I was," he said softly. The monk nodded. "Good, that version was too small." You may feel this recognition too. Perhaps you've spent much of your life building yourself from the outside, in through achievements, roles, appearance, approval. And now, perhaps gently, something within you is ready to soften, to stop performing, to begin seeing. Some teachings remind us that the most important mirrors are not hung on walls, but held in silence. That the people who challenge us, the moments that unsettle us, and the peace that finds us unexpectedly are all forms of reflection. The monk raised his hand and touched his heart. "See this clearly," he said. "There is no enemy, no savior, no other. Only parts of you in different clothes." The traveler bowed, not to the monk, to the truth. Then he stood. The mist behind him had closed, and the bridge no longer showed. The ridge was now solid, stone beneath his feet. Ahead stretched a new path, quiet, open, waiting. He took a step. And though the monk remained behind, his presence moved with him like a calm breath resting just beneath thought. You do not need to find a mirror, monk. You are already walking with one, every breath, every moment, every encounter that stirs something in you. Each is an invitation, see clearly. And when you do, you may find, as the traveler did, that the clearest view is not of the world, but of the one who watches it. What if the people and moments you resist are not obstacles, but mirrors inviting you to meet yourself, with eyes open and heart gently unguarded? The path that followed was smooth, gently descending through fields of tall grass that shimmered silver under the moon's soft gaze. The wind stirred the blades with patient rhythm, like a hand brushing over silk. The traveler walked slowly, no longer in search, but in step with something deeper than purpose presence. A small grove appeared ahead, ringed with stone lanterns long unlit. In the center stood a single tree, its trunk thick with age, branches wide and low. Beneath it sat a man in robes the color of wind-blown sand, his eyes closed, hands folded over a bamboo flute resting in his lap. The traveler paused at the edge of the grove. As if sensing him, the man opened his eyes. He did not speak. He simply raised the flute to his lips and played. The sound was unlike anything the traveler had heard. It wasn't melody, it wasn't performance. It was breath transformed, soft, spacious, and utterly free. When the song ended, the man lowered the flute and looked into the traveler's eyes. "The wind does not push," he said. "It moves through." This is the Zen teaching of non-resistance to change, the gentle art of letting transformation pass through us without grasping or bracing. In Buddhist thought, change is not an interruption to life. It is life. All things, thoughts, seasons, identities are part of this great movement. Some traditions say that suffering begins not in change itself, but in the tightening that comes when we fear its passage. The traveler sat on a stone near the base of the tree. "I've lost many things," he said softly. "Places, people, ideas of myself." The flutist nodded. "Of course, leaves fall. Rivers change course. You are part of this." "But sometimes," the traveler whispered, "I want to hold still." The man smiled gently. "Even stillness flows. Even silence breathes." He raised the flute again, but this time did not play. Instead, he handed it to the traveler. The traveler hesitated. "I don't know how." "Then let the wind teach you." The traveler placed the flute to his lips. He inhaled, exhaled. No note came. Only breath again. Still silence. Then, softly, unexpectedly, a tone emerged. Unsteady, but real, the flutist nodded. "You do not need to control the wind. You only need to become hollow enough to let it pass." The traveler closed his eyes and played once more, not to produce music, but to experience the movement. And something within him opened, not broken, not lost. Simply opened. Like a door that had always been waiting for wind. You might feel this too, the resistance to change. The urge to hold on to what once was, to name things and keep them fixed. But what if everything is already in motion? What if your job is not to anchor, but to allow? Some teachings remind us that the hollow reed sings only when it allows the wind to move through. That the heart too must become a flute open, empty and willing. The traveler handed the flute back. The flutist did not take it. "It's yours now," he said. The traveler bowed, not with his body, but with his breath. And as he walked once more beneath the starlit sky, he carried the flute gently in one hand, not as a tool, but as a reminder. A reminder that the wind, though invisible, will always find the opening. And when it does, it sings. What if the changes that unsettle you are not storms to survive, but winds of wisdom, asking only that you soften, open, and let them pass through you with grace? The traveler continued, the bamboo flute now resting against his hip, its lightness surprising. It did not burden. It belonged not as an object of mastery, but as a companion of breath. The stars above pulsed quietly, and the path bent again, leading through low hills tinged in moonlight. As he followed its curve, a tree unlike any other came into view. It stood alone in a wide clearing, its bark dark and polished, its branches sparse yet blooming. Not with spring's fresh buds, but with autumn flowers, crimson, gold, ivory, soft petals unfolding out of season. The traveler stopped, moved closer, and sat beneath its canopy. A few blossoms drifted down, caught in his hair and lap. Their fragrance was unfamiliar, rich, but not overwhelming. Subtle, like a memory that arrives without warning and asks for nothing but attention. This is the Zen teaching of unexpected beauty and impermanence, the understanding that life often reveals its deepest truths not in predictability, but in gentle surprise. In Buddhist thought, impermanence is not a tragedy. It is the canvas on which beauty becomes visible, precisely because it doesn't last. Some traditions say a flower that blooms in autumn teaches more than one that blooms in spring. The traveler looked up at the tree, its blossoms glowing in the moonlight, delicate yet bold. He remembered a tale once whispered beneath a waterfall. A woman tended a garden for many years. One year, the frost came early. All the plants withered, save one tree. She wept, thinking it had died. But as winter deepened, it bloomed. Flowers opened slowly, defiantly. A monk passing by said, "This tree has learned that beauty is not a season, it is a choice." The traveler lay back against the roots, letting the petals fall where they wished. He thought of the times he had waited for life to offer beauty on schedule, waited for the right moment. The right version of himself, the right answer. But here, now, beneath this tree, he understood, beauty is not bound to when. It arrives when it will, and only those who are quiet enough, empty enough, can receive it fully. You may know moments like this. Perhaps you've experienced something blooming in the wrong season, grief that gave birth to clarity, an ending that offered release, love that arrived late, yet right on time. What if these are not anomalies? What if they are truths too subtle for plans? Some teachings say that the deepest beauty is not loud. It doesn't wait for fanfare. It simply shows up unannounced, out of season, but precisely when you need it most. The traveler plucked one petal from the ground, not to keep it, but to feel its texture. Then he let it fall again. There was no need to preserve it. It had already fulfilled its purpose. He stood, brushing off his robe, and bowed to the tree. Not in sorrow that the petals would fade, but in gratitude that they had ever appeared at all. The moon dipped lower now. The wind moved through the branches like a sigh. And the traveler walked on, each footstep a whisper of presence, each breath a bloom of its own. What if the beauty you seek does not arrive according to your timing, but reveals itself exactly when your heart is quiet enough to notice that even in autumn, some trees still choose to flower? The path wound downward now, tracing the curve of a gentle slope where tall grasses bent in unison to the rhythm of the wind. The traveler's steps grew slower again, not from fatigue, but reverence. The silence was thicker here, rich like soil that has held generations of fallen leaves. Ahead, nestled at the base of a hill, sat a small structure made of worn wood and stone. It was not a temple, nor a home, more like a resting place. A shelter shaped by care, by stillness. Light spilled from its doorway, not bright, but warm, as if the walls themselves glowed softly from within. Drawn to its quiet invitation, the traveler stepped inside. There was only one object in the center of the room, a bowl. Simple, shallow, made of porcelain, so thin it was nearly translucent, and cracked. A fine golden seam curved through its surface like a river through snow. It had been broken and mended, and now it gleamed. This is the Zen teaching of kintsugi, the art of embracing imperfection not as damage, but as beauty revealed through time and tenderness. In Buddhist understanding, what breaks is not to be hidden, but to be seen, honored, and made whole through loving attention. Some traditions believe that the soul, like the bowl, becomes most radiant after it has been held through its fracture. The traveler knelt before the bowl. He did not touch it. But he looked at it the way one looks at a reflection, not expecting perfection, only truth. A story returned to him, one told softly in a town he had long forgotten. A young potter dropped her finest work, her teacher's favorite bowl. She wept and tried to glue it back invisibly. Her teacher stopped her. "We will use gold," he said. "But then everyone will see it was broken," she cried. "Exactly," he replied. "And they will also see that it was loved enough to be made whole again." The traveler felt a tenderness rise in his chest. He thought of the places within himself that had cracked. Not visibly, but deeply, moments of loss, of silence when he needed words, of words that had harmed instead of helped. And now, in the glow of this humble room, he did not flinch from them. He breathed into them. He imagined them filled with gold, not erased, but embraced. You may know these places too. Parts of you you've hidden, believing them too damaged, too flawed, too unworthy of being seen. But what if these are the very spaces that long to be gilded, not with shame, but with care? Some teachings remind us that healing is not a return to what was, but a becoming of something more beautiful than before. Not in spite of the break, but because of it. The traveler stood slowly. He bowed to the bowl not as an object of worship, but of recognition. Then he turned to leave. the light from the doorway falling across his face like a quiet affirmation. Outside, the stars blinked gently, as if nodding in approval. He felt no urge to hurry. He carried the memory of the bowl now not in his hands, but in the quiet gold lines within his heart. He did not need to hide the breaks. They were his way through. And through them, he had become luminous. What if the parts of you that have cracked are not your shame, but your offering? And what if the light that shines through them is the most beautiful truth you will ever carry? The night had deepened into its most silent hour. Even the stars, once bright and eager, now shimmered with a softer glow, as though they too had leaned into rest. The path ahead stretched into a wide, open plain where the earth was flat and sky touched ground with no interruption. Each breath the traveler took echoed with quiet freedom, like the inhale of someone who had at last laid down what no longer needed to be carried. He walked slowly, with the calm certainty of someone no longer asking what lies ahead. Then, without planning, he stopped, not because something blocked the way, but because something within him paused. He turned, behind him no footsteps, no marks in the grass, no evidence he had ever walked here at all. The path he had traveled, the bridges he had crossed, the teachers he had met gone, not in loss, but in release. There were no footprints, only presence. This is the Zen teaching of non-attachment to identity, the understanding that who we believe we are is constantly changing, and to cling to a fixed self is to invite suffering. In Buddhist thought, the self is not a thing, but a process of fluid, conditioned, and empty of inherent solidity. Some traditions say that the truest freedom comes not from knowing who you are, but from no longer needing to know. The traveler knelt. He placed his hands gently on the earth. "I was," he whispered, "and I am, and I will be." Then he stood. He recalled a story once shared by a silent master one who never spoke until spoken to, and even then only answered in parables. A man walked across a desert and looked back. There were no tracks behind him. "I am lost," he said. A sage appeared and replied, "You are free, but how will I remember where I've been?" "You won't," said the sage. "You will remember how it felt." The man bowed and never looked back again. The traveler smiled. He understood now. Memory is not a map, it is a lantern. Its light doesn't show the road behind, but the wisdom gathered along the way. You may know this feeling too. Moments when your path seems to fade, not in forgetfulness, but in gentleness. When the person you thought you were no longer fits the shape of your breath? What if that's not disappearance? What if it's emergence? Some teachings remind us, your true nature is not a fixed image, but a mirror reflecting the sky, the river, the wind, and then returning to stillness. The traveler lifted the flute from his side and played one soft note. It drifted across the plain, not seeking echo, just being. Then he walked again, each step no longer defining him, but arising from him. Not a self, but a movement, not a name, but a presence. The earth held him, the sky received him, and the quiet space where his past once stood now bloomed with boundless possibility. What if who you are is not a fixed identity to protect, but an ever-changing presence to witness, breathe with, and gently let unfold with each step forward? The plain gave way to soft hills, once more undulating shapes carved gently by wind and time, their slopes touched by moonlight. The traveler walked among them without effort, as though the earth itself had begun to carry him. There was no need for direction now, no need for signs. What guided him was quieter than thought, subtler than intuition. It was knowing without knowing. And then he saw it. A gate, but no wall. Just two tall posts made of worn cedar, joined at the top by a curved beam. It stood alone in the landscape, marking no boundary, offering no resistance. It didn't divide, it invited. The traveler paused at its threshold. He looked beyond, no visible difference on the other side. Same hills, same sky, same breath, and yet something felt different. He stepped through, and nothing happened, but everything changed. This is the Zen teaching of ritual as inner transformation, the understanding that certain thresholds are not about external change, but about the permission we give ourselves to shift within. In Buddhist tradition, gates like this are symbolic. They represent passage, not from one place to another, but from one way of being to another. Some traditions say the greatest transitions are invisible from the outside, but unmistakable to the soul. The traveler looked back. The gate still stood, but the self who had not yet stepped through it was gone. He knelt, not in worship, but in recognition of what had been shed, of what had been seen, of what no longer needed to be carried forward. He recalled a story once etched into a temple's wood beams, retold by monks sweeping the courtyard each morning. A man carried a bundle of thoughts to the edge of the world. At the border stood a gate with no wall. He asked, "What lies beyond?" The gatekeeper replied, "That depends on what you leave behind." The man placed his thoughts on the ground. He stepped through and discovered himself without the noise. The traveler exhaled, a breath that carried more than air it carried years. Then he walked on. The land stretched before him with quiet openness. There were no destinations, only invitations. Each tree, each shadow, each rustle of grass seemed to whisper, "Welcome back." You may feel a gate in your own life. Perhaps it's not made of wood. Perhaps it's a moment, a decision, a breath. Something that asks not that you go somewhere else, but that you arrive more fully here. What if crossing that gate is not about leaving anything behind, but about remembering who you are beneath the clinging? Some teachings remind us that ritual is not for spectacle. It is a marker for the heart, a way of saying, "I am ready. Ready to walk without armor. Ready to speak without rehearsing. Ready to live without hiding." The traveler passed a tree whose bark bore a single symbol, a circle, incomplete. An enso, drawn not for perfection but for presence. He touched it gently with his fingers and kept walking. The hills quieted around him. He no longer needed to ask, "Where am I going?" He was not going anywhere. He was arriving. Step by step, breath by breath. What if the turning point in your life isn't something dramatic, but a quiet crossing through an invisible gate, where you lay down the need to become and finally begin to simply be? The land began to shift once more. The open hills narrowed into a soft canyon where tall stone walls rose gently on either side, veined with moss and thyme. The air grew cooler, the wind thinner, and the traveler's steps slowed again, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. Each sound he made seemed amplified, here each footfall a drumbeat, each breath a bell. And there, on the path ahead, he saw them, footprints, not recent, faint, fading, pressed lightly into the dust and stone. They curved with the canyon, meandered through its middle, then disappeared where the stone path grew hard again. The traveler knelt and traced one with his fingers, then another, each one imperfect, each one true. This is the Zen teaching of the fading self, the realization that nothing we do, no matter how meaningful, leaves a permanent mark. In Buddhist thought, this echoes anatta, the doctrine of non-self, that who we are is not a fixed imprint, but a flow, a pattern, a ripple in a great ocean of experience. Some traditions say that when you finally stop trying to leave your mark, you begin to truly walk. The traveler rose and walked slowly, following the path, even though the prints had vanished. He didn't need them to continue. He carried them in his memory not as direction, but as presence. He remembered a story shared by a gardener monk in a mountaintop temple, who pruned trees so lightly that they seemed untouched. A young monk asked, "Why don't you leave more of yourself behind?" The gardener replied, "I would rather be remembered in how the trees grow, but no one will know it was you," the monk said. "Exactly," the gardener whispered. "That is how I know it was true." The canyon walls opened slightly, and the path widened again. The traveler stopped, looked back, no footprints. Only dust, only silence. And yet, he felt full. Not because he would be remembered, but because he had been present. You may feel this truth within your own life, the urge to leave something behind, to be known, to be marked. But what if your truest legacy is not what others remember, but how they feel in your presence? Some teachings remind us, the deepest impression is not carved into stone, it's carried in breath, in kindness, in the way you listened when no one else did. And the traveler looked up. A hawk soared high above, wings cutting gentle arcs through the air. It left no trace. But it changed the sky. He smiled, then stepped forward again. With no need to be remembered, only to be here, only to be. What if the most meaningful traces you leave behind are not in your footsteps, but in the stillness you carried, the care you gave, and the breath that changed the shape of the moment without demanding to be named? The canyon walls slowly gave way to forest again, an older one this time. The trees stood taller here, their trunks wide and silent, their roots braided deep into the earth like thoughts that had grown still from age. Ferns unfurled from beneath shadowed rocks, and soft moss carpeted everything with a hush. There was a feeling in the air, not of destination but of return. As the traveler walked deeper into the woods, he noticed that the birds did not sing, and yet the silence did not feel empty. It was the kind of quiet that listens with you, that holds you. Soon, a stone structure came into view, half buried in earth and vine, a temple, but not one built to be seen. Its roof was broken, trees growing through its center. Its altar was long gone. Only a few carved steps remained, leading to a space that no longer offered teachings. And yet, it radiated peace. The traveler entered without hesitation. He sat among the fallen stones, placed his hands on his knees, and closed his eyes. There was nothing to be learned here, only remembered. This is the Zen teaching of truth without form, the understanding that teachings do not always live in words, or temples, or scriptures, but often in the dissolving of those things. In Buddhist thought, ultimate wisdom is not grasped, it is realized in the moment when grasping ends. Some traditions say the greatest temples are the ones that fall, leaving you alone with yourself. The traveler took a slow breath. He did not meditate. He did not pray. He simply rested utterly. And in that rest, something vast opened inside him, not like a door but like a sky. A memory rose from within, unbidden but whole. A student once searched for a bell in a temple that had no sound. "Where is the call to mindfulness?" he asked. The master replied, "It rings each time you notice your breath." The student said, "But I hear nothing." "Then your work is not to listen harder," said the master. "It is to stop waiting for something else to tell you you've already arrived." The traveler opened his eyes. Sunlight filtered through the broken roof. A bird perched quietly on the stone near him. He bowed not to the temple, but to the emptiness where something had once been and now no longer needed to be. You may feel this too. The moments when structures you leaned on fall away, roles, identities, answers, belief systems. And perhaps at first the silence feels cold, but what if it is sacred? What if the place left behind is the place where presence finally arrives? Some teachings remind us that truth, like breath, cannot be contained. It moves in spaces we once filled with noise. It enters only when we no longer try to build a house around it. The traveler rose. He walked out through the fractured doorway, bowed his head to the vines, and left the temple behind. Or perhaps it left him, not with words, but with the space where words had once tried to live. Now there was only this step, this breath, this forest singing without sound. What if your most profound awakening doesn't come from what is built, but from what gently falls away, leaving behind the vastness of a quiet mind ready to meet itself? As the forest thinned, the ground beneath the traveler's feet began to slope gently downward. The air grew warmer, touched with the scent of pine needles and soft earth. There was no path now, only space. Space to walk, to breathe, to notice. He followed the curve of the land until it opened into a glade where a wide, slow-moving river shimmered under the early morning light. The current was lazy, not rushing to be anywhere, its surface broken only by the occasional leaf drifting in silence. The traveler stepped to its edge and sat. He did not need to cross. Not this time. He watched the water move. And he let it be. This is the Zen teaching of letting the water be water, the invitation to stop stirring what wants to settle, to stop demanding clarity where there is only reflection. In Buddhist thought, the mind is often likened to a pool. Agitated, it distorts. Stilled, it reveals. Some traditions say that enlightenment is not achieved, but uncovered when we stop trying to see and simply look. The traveler reached for a smooth stone and held it in his palm. It was warm from the sun, cool beneath the surface. He ran his thumb over it and then placed it back where he found it. He remembered a story told on a summer evening long ago. Beside another river, a monk stood beside a pool, watching ripples spread from a single drop. A student approached and said, I cannot see the truth in my life. The monk dipped a branch in the water, stirring the surface. And now? It's even worse, said the student. The monk placed the branch down. They waited. Slowly, the ripples faded. The student saw his own reflection. Sometimes, the monk whispered, clarity comes when we stop touching what needs to rest. The traveler looked into the water. His reflection stared back not sharply, but gently, softened by the motion of the river. He did not try to capture it, he only noticed the way the water moved through him, and how, in stillness, everything returned. You may recognize this pattern in your own life, the way the mind stirs stories, seeks answers, resists rest. Perhaps you've spent much time reaching into the water hoping to scoop out clarity. But what if what you need is not effort, but release? What if stillness is not passivity, but deep participation? Some teachings remind us, when we stop stirring, the water settles. When we stop chasing, the truth arrives. The traveler placed his hands on his knees. He listened to the rhythm of the river, not as a sound, as a presence, a language without words. And for a long time he said nothing, did nothing. He simply let the world be what it was, and let himself be part of it. Not above it, not separate, just here. A breeze stirred the leaves. A dragonfly hovered near the surface. The water carried everything and asked for nothing. And he too could now carry himself, lightly. You do not need to hold every thought. You do not need to fix every moment. Sometimes peace arrives when you let the current be what it is and let your reflection ripple and return as it will. What if the clarity you seek is already there, beneath the surface, and it only needs you to stop stirring the waters of your mind, and trust that what is true will rise on its own? The sun had begun its rise, not in brilliance, but in hush, sending soft bands of gold across the treetops, stretching long shadows behind the traveler. The river now shimmered with morning light, and its voice, quiet all through the night, had returned to a gentle murmur. Like an old friend beginning to speak again after a long, comfortable silence, the traveler stood. He had not planned to, but his body knew it was time. He turned from the river and found a narrow path that curled into the trees again, an ancient foot trail, barely visible, like a story nearly forgotten but still living in the landscape. He followed it, not because he needed more answers, but because walking had become a form of listening. After a time, he arrived at the edge of a wide stone field, dusted with moss and framed by pine. At the center stood something simple, a low platform of smooth granite with 3 flat stones arranged upon it. No signs, no teachers, no instructions. Just space. He stepped onto the platform and stood in the center, and breathed. The wind moved through his robe. The sun warmed his shoulders. A single leaf fell beside him and came to rest without sound. He felt the fullness of everything he had experienced, the bridges, the mirrors, the mist, the flute, the autumn flowers, the bowl, the rain, and yet he carried none of it. It had all passed through him and made space. This is the Zen teaching of presence without grasping, the final understanding that nothing needs to be held to be real. In Buddhist thought, awakening is not a possession, it is a release. Not a truth we contain, but a state we become by letting go of becoming. Some traditions say that when we no longer try to remember the path remembers us. The traveler sat down on the stone platform and closed his eyes, not in effort, but in rest. No questions surfaced. No answers arrived. Just one long, steady breath that felt like the whole of life moving in and out of him. He remembered the final story an old master once told, shared only when a student was ready to leave. A monk walked his whole life in search of the final step. One day, he stopped and sat beneath a tree. A child came by and offered him a bowl of water. The monk drank. The child smiled and walked away. The monk wept, not from sorrow, but because he had been walking so long, he'd forgotten how simple it could be. He whispered, this was the final step. This breath. This sip. The traveler smiled. He did not need to rise. He did not need to plan what came next. He simply rested, eyes closed, feeling the wind move across his skin like time itself, saying, you've arrived. You may feel it now too, not as a grand revelation, but as a gentle settling, a sense that you do not need to go farther. You do not need to be more. You are not behind. You are not incomplete. You are, in this moment, the entire journey made whole. Some teachings remind us, we never find truth by racing toward it. We find it when we become still enough for it to meet us where we already are. The traveler breathed in once more, then opened his eyes and saw nothing new, only everything exactly as it had always been, and it was enough. What if the peace you seek is not ahead of you but already here waiting patiently beneath your breath? In the silence that follows your letting go and the stillness that remains when there is no longer anything to reach for. The sky stretched wide above him now, clear, endless, and deepening into a soft blue. Morning had fully arrived, though it did not announce itself with urgency. No alarm, no rush. Just the gradual blooming of light and shadow. The same way a calm understanding opens in the heart, unfolding quietly, petal by petal. The traveler stood once more on the stone platform. His feet felt rooted, his body light, and in his hands nothing remained, no staff, no bundle. No questions, just breath and presence. He stepped down from the stones and began walking once again, though now, each movement felt like a continuation of stillness. Like motion and rest had become the same. After some time, he arrived at the banks of another stream. Not wide, not deep. It wound slowly through smooth stones and reeds, reflecting the sky in scattered pieces. He knelt beside it and scooped water into his palms, drinking deeply. Cool, earthy, real. He looked up, and there, on the opposite side, sat the final figure he would meet. An old man, wrapped in simple cloth, gazing into the water. He looked up and smiled as the traveler approached. "Have you come far?" the old man asked. The traveler shook his head slowly. "No, just deep." The old man nodded. "That is farther than most ever go." This is the Zen teaching of the return without seeking, the final step in the journey that brings us back to the beginning, changed not by what we found, but by what we let go. In Buddhist thought, this echoes samsara and nirvana are not different places, that the end of the path is not another world, but the same world seen with different eyes. Some traditions say the destination is simply this: to arrive in your own life without resistance. The old man gestured beside him. The traveler sat. Together they watched the stream. Nothing needed to be said. And yet, everything was understood. The water flowed. The trees swayed, and in that quiet rhythm, time folded in on itself. The traveler had not found enlightenment like a prize. He had become it one breath at a time. He remembered the earliest steps, the village without maps, the bridge that only appeared when walked upon, the bowl that had been broken, the wind that played through a flute, the mirror that showed not answers but presence, all of it. A circle, like the enso drawn in one unbroken line. You might sense this within yourself now, this return, not to the beginning, but to the present scene now with gentler eyes, softer breath, wider heart. Some teachings remind us that the final teaching is silence, that when the stories fall away, when the rituals dissolve, when the striving ends, what remains is not emptiness, but fullness, not confusion, but peace. The old man stood, he bowed, the traveler bowed in return, not as student or teacher, just as one presence meeting another. Then the old man walked back into the trees, and the traveler sat, and breathed, and smiled. There was nowhere left to go, because he had arrived, and in that arrival he dissolved into the great rhythm of being. What if the journey was never about changing who you are, but remembering who you've always been, and learning to rest fully inside that truth without needing anything more? And now, dear traveler of breath and stillness, your journey has come to its quiet close. Let the body soften, like leaves drifting toward the earth, no longer reaching, no longer grasping. Let your breath lengthen. Let your exhale grow slower. Let it carry away what no longer serves you, like mist retreating from morning light. There is no need to hold anything, no wisdom to chase, no bridge to find. Only this moment, this rhythm, this peace. Feel the surface beneath you, steady and gentle. Notice the weight of your body, welcomed by the earth without condition. Notice how the air enters you without effort and leaves without fear. Let your mind become like the still pond's surface, undisturbed, its depth profound. Let the silence wrap around you like a warm robe. woven from the countless breaths you've taken in trust, in surrender, in awakening. Let go now of the story. Let go of time. Let go of the watcher. You are not what you've done. You are not what you feared. You are not what you've carried. You are breath. You are presence. You are here. And in this here-ness, there is no lack. Only space. Only stillness. Only rest. As you begin to drift, allow your dreams to carry forward the seeds planted on this path, seeds of gentleness, of awareness, of enoughness. May they blossom softly in your sleep and bloom fully in the light of your waking. End of script. May you find peace and rest.